Grüß Gott, meine Damen und Herren, und willkommen zurück. Das ist die 23. Lektion in unserer Reise durch die deutsche Sprache. Do you remember where we left off in our fairy tale from the previous lesson? Richtig, mit der Axt. We ended right at the most intense moment. Bärbel has the axe raised, her eyes closed, and then? Nein, meine Damen und Herren, I shall not spoil it for you. Instead, let's listen now to Teil 5 of the Märchen Bärbel und die drei rotbärtigen Zwerge. It's also der letzte Teil, which means we get to learn how the story ends. Also dann. Bärbel hob die Axt und schloss die Augen. Aber bevor sie die Axt schwang, sang sie das Lieblingslied von ihrer Mutter. Es gibt wohl nichts schöner als das Morgenlicht. Es scheint so warm und hell auf des frommen Gesicht. Nun, an diesem Morgen gab es einen jungen Jäger im Wald. Er hörte das Singen und dachte sich, das ist eine wunderschöne Stimme. Er sah Bärbel mit der Axt und er schrie, was machen Sie da, schönes Fräulein? Bärbel ließ die Axt fallen. Sie erzählte von den Zwergen und der Jäger wurde wütend. Er wusste, dass sie Bärbel betrogen. Ich habe eine Idee, sagte der Jäger. Sie sollen ihren Arm im Hemd verstecken. Ich verstecke mich hinter dem Grabstein. Und wenn die bösen Zwerge kommen, erschieße ich sie mit meiner Armbrust. Also, Bärbel versteckte ihren Arm im Hemd und der Jäger versteckte sich hinter dem Grabstein. Wieder fing Bärbel an zu weinen. Und wieder erschienen die drei Zwerge. In diesem Moment sprang der Jäger auf und erschoss. Alle drei aber mit einem Pfeil. Bald darauf heirateten Bärbel und der Jäger. Und wenn sie nicht gestorben sind, so leben sie noch heute. Well, well, meine Damen und Herren, that's what we call in German ein happy end. Did you notice how our fairy tale ends? Und wenn sie nicht gestorben sind, so leben sie noch heute. Now this translates to something like, and if they haven't died, then they are still living today. Pretty straightforward, right? Well, fairy tales in English commonly end with, and they lived happily ever after. But in their original German format, most Märchen ended with this same phrase. Und wenn sie nicht gestorben sind, so leben sie noch heute. By the way, in addition to various strong verbs from the 7 categories we covered in our last lesson, our story about Bärbel also contains a few, well, let's call them category-less strong verbs. For instance, we heard the simple past of the verb betrügen, whose pattern is betrügen, betrog, betrogen. Another common verb with this same pattern is lügen, lügen, log, gelogen. A few other misfit strong verbs from our story are gehen, ging, gegangen, kommen, kam, gekommen, and tun, tat, getan. Again, because these verbs don't neatly fit into any of the 7 lovely categories of strong verbs, we just have to memorize them. But hey, guess it's a good exercise for das Gehirn. Nun, meine Damen und Herren, there's just one last type of verb that we need to discuss here. It's also one that we learned about in a previous lesson on the present perfect. But here, let me jog your memory. I'm talking here about verbs like kennen, wissen, and denken. Do these verbs look familiar? These verbs, you might recall, display traits of both weak and strong verbs. Namely, they take a T suffix and a vowel change. And do you remember what we call these types of verbs? Richtig, mixed verbs. Recall that the past participles of kennen, wissen, and denken go like this: gekannt, gewusst, and gedacht. And guess what? This same pattern of mixedness, that is, half weak, half strong, the same pattern applies to the simple past tense as well. Rinnen, rannte, gerannt. Kennen, kannte, gekannt. Denken, dachte, gedacht. Bringen, brachte, gebracht. Brennen, brannte, gebrannt. And nennen, nannte, genannt. Take special note, by the way, of the verbs denken and bringen. Both take a slight consonant change as well. Denken, dachte, bringen, brachte. Und das, meine Damen und Herren, ist alles. This officially ends our discussion of the simple past. We've covered weak verbs, all 7 categories of strong verbs, and now mixed verbs as well. Ich gratuliere Ihnen. Now, I know that you're all going to miss all of these lovely verbs and categories, but it's time to turn our attention away from grammar to focus our efforts on building our active Wortschatz. Jawohl! Und diesmal, meine Damen und Herren, we are going to learn the vocab for talking about Berufe und der Arbeitsplatz. For instance, take a look at these 3 women, each with a different profession. Die erste Frau ist Altenpflegerin. Die zweite Frau ist Immobilienmaklerin und die dritte Frau ist Bauarbeiterin. Here's a short description of one of these female professionals. Das ist eine Frau, die Häuser verkauft. Now, which professional did I just describe? Das ist eine Frau, die Häuser verkauft. Genau, I described die Immobilienmaklerin. Here are 3 more professionals, this time all men. Der erste Mann ist Richter. Der zweite ist Lieferant. Und der dritte ist Dachdecker. And now for the descriptions. Dieser Mann liefert das Gemüse, das vom Bauernhof kommt. Also dann, wen habe ich beschrieben? War das der Richter, der Lieferant oder der Dachdecker? Richtig, der Lieferant. Now you're getting the hang of it, right? So then, try these next 3. Der erste Mann ist Klempner. Der zweite ist Tischler und der dritte ist Maurer. And here's the description. Das ist ein Mann, der Sachen aus Holz baut. Welcher Mann ist das? Richtig, das ist der Tischler. Well done, meine Damen und Herren. These are just a few of the many professions auf Deutsch. Be sure to check your course workbook, though, for a more exhaustive list. Nun, that little activity wasn't just about vocab. I also snuck in some new grammar in case you didn't notice. Das war clever, oder? For instance, in the first round of Was ist dieser Mensch von Beruf? We saw photos of die Altenpflegerin, die Immobilienmaklerin und die Bauarbeiterin. And we heard the following description. Das ist eine Frau, die Häuser verkauft. Now, if we look closely at this single sentence, what we'll see is that it actually comes from two separate sentences that have been connected with the word die. Das ist eine Frau. Sie verkauft Häuser. Now, in both German and English, we could describe a female realtor like this. It's a woman. She sells houses. But you know, this is kind of awkward and repetitive. So instead, languages like English and German allow us to replace the awkward and repetitive sounding personal pronouns, she and sie, with what we call relative pronouns, like this. Das ist eine Frau, die. It's a woman who. And then we complete the utterance. Das ist eine Frau, die Häuser verkauft. It's a woman who sells houses. Note as well the slight pause between the noun and the relative pronoun. Now, our sentence comprises two clauses. A main clause, das ist eine Frau, it's a woman, and a dependent clause, headed up by a relative pronoun, die Häuser verkauft, who sells houses. We call clauses like this relative clauses. We saw a few sentences with relative clauses in our vocab activity, for instance. Check it out. Dieser Mann liefert das Gemüse, das vom Bauernhof kommt. Das ist ein Mann, der Sachen aus Holz baut. Every relative pronoun has a specific noun in the main clause to which that relative pronoun refers. This noun is what we call the antecedent. Think of the relative pronoun as like reaching back across the boundary between the dependent and the main clause and latching on to the antecedent noun that it's grammatically entangled with. And speaking of grammatical entanglement, did you happen to notice that German relative pronouns have several forms? For instance, in the descriptions of the professions we saw that the relative pronouns can be die, das, and der. But this is only the start, meine Damen und Herren. German, you see, actually has 16 different relative pronouns, according to number, gender, and case. In this lesson, we're going to learn 12 of them. But once we've gone over the patterns, and once we've applied what we've already learned about German, trust me, you'll see that it's really not as difficult as it sounds. Alles klar? To start off with, there are two main things we need to know about German relative pronouns. First, relative pronouns in German reflect the number and gender of their antecedent in the main clause. And second, relative pronouns reflect the grammatical relations in the relative clause. Now, to see what I mean, let's take a look at two more sentences, each with a main and a relative clause. The first sentence is, wo ist der Computer, den ich neulich gekauft habe? The antecedent here is der Computer, which is a masculine singular noun. The relative pronoun retains this information about the antecedent's number and gender. However, the grammatical relations in the relative clause are different. So the relative pronoun needs to express these new relations. In the relative clause, den ich neulich gekauft habe, the masculine relative pronoun is in the accusative because it is the direct object of the subject ich, you see? It is the thing that the subject bought. You get it? Now let's apply this same method to the second sentence. Der Chef sucht die Unterlagen, die auf seinem Bürotisch waren. Here, the relative pronoun is die, which refers to the plural noun die Unterlagen in the main clause. Now, that's our antecedent. So, in the relative clause, the plural relative pronoun has to adapt to its new grammatical surroundings, so to speak. It is now the subject. It is the things that were on the office desk. And so the relative pronoun here, die, is both plural and nominative. Alles klar? Now, we'll come back to all this in a moment, and we'll go over some more examples. Right now, though, it is time to unveil yet another wondrous grammar table. And this lovely table shows us all 12 of the relative pronouns that we'll be focusing on in this lesson. All of them organized by case, number, and gender. Now, the first thing I want to point out is that, with only one exception, guess what? These relative pronouns look exactly like the definite articles we've already learned. Jawohl, das haben Sie richtig gehört. They're almost exactly the same. The exception, though, is the dative plural relative pronoun, which is denen. The takeaway here is this. Because we're already familiar with the definite articles, we really only have to learn one new form for the relative pronouns. Ist das nicht großartig? And now, in the wake of this great news, what do you say we start building some sentences of our own? Sentences with both a main and a relative clause. Ja? Los geht's. And here is how it's going to work. We're going to see a pair of sentences appear on the screen, like these. Ich kenne die Frau. Sie arbeitet in Berlin als Immobilienmaklerin. Now, our first order of business will be to determine two things. 1. Which noun from the first sentence is going to be our antecedent? And 2. Which noun from the second sentence is going to serve as the relative pronoun for this antecedent? Looking at the first sentence here, the feminine noun die Frau is the focus, and therefore, it's going to be the antecedent. What's more, in the second sentence, die Frau is expressed as the personal pronoun sie. Now, our second order of business is to determine which relative pronoun we'll need to use in the relative clause. And to do this, we must go back to our two key facts about German relative pronouns. Do you remember what those two are? 1, they express the number and gender of their antecedent and main clauses. And 2, they express the grammatical relations of the relative pronoun in the relative clause. So then, let's apply this now to our two sentences. Are you ready? Die Frau, our antecedent, is a singular feminine noun. And now that we've determined the antecedent's gender or number, we can now narrow down the range of possible relative pronouns from 12 to 3, like this. Now, there are only 3 possible relative pronouns for a singular feminine antecedent. Remember, there's nominative die, accusative die, or dative der. To decide which of these 3 it is, we need to determine their grammatical relations in the second sentence, which is going to become our relative clause. Sie arbeitet in Berlin als Immobilienmaklerin. So here, we first ask our question that's going to tell us what is the nominative. And we ask, who or what did something? That's going to be our subject. Here, it's the personal pronoun sie, which means that the relative pronoun will replace this nominative subject pronoun, must also be nominative. In other words, it's die. And now, meine Damen und Herren, we can finally build our lovely, complicated sentence. Our main clause is, ich kenne die Frau, followed by a comma. Ich kenne die Frau, comma. Next, we put in the feminine nominative relative pronoun. Ich kenne die Frau, die. Then we put the verb at the end. Ich kenne die Frau, die arbeitet. And then finally, we add in the additional information about where she works and what she does. And there you have it. Here's what the whole sentence looks like, mapped out with brackets and labels. Ich kenne die Frau, die in Berlin als Immobilienmaklerin arbeitet. You see, it all makes wonderful grammatical sense. Und es macht Spaß. Let's do another one, and we're going to apply the same process. Alles klar? Gut. Also dann, here are the two sentences. Das Unternehmen hat viele Angestellte. Sie arbeiten dort gern. So then, meine Damen und Herren, what is our antecedent going to be? Richtig, Angestellte. Now, is it singular or plural? Genau, it's plural. Okay, which noun in the second sentence is going to be replaced by our plural relative pronoun? Richtig, the personal pronoun sie. And finally, what is this pronoun's grammatical role in the second sentence? Sehr gut, sie is the subject. Schön. Now we can figure out which relative pronoun we need. Remember that the options for plural relative pronouns are die for the nominative and accusative, and denen for dative. And since we just determined that our relative pronoun will be the subject in the relative clause, we know that we need the nominative form, die. And just like that, we can build our grammatically beautiful sentence, Das Unternehmen hat viele Angestellte, die dort gern arbeiten. Okay, let's do one last round of Let's Build a Sentence, shall we? Aber Achtung, this is a tough one. Are you ready? Gut, los geht's. The sentences are, wie heißt die Kollegen? And ich soll ihr den Auftrag anvertrauen. Also dann, first up, we determine the antecedent. Jawohl, it's the singular feminine noun, die Kollegen. Then we look to the second sentence. Which word here is going to be replaced with the relative pronoun? Achtung, there are three options. There's ich, ihr, and den Auftrag. So then, which of these three refers to die Kollegen in the first sentence? Genau, the personal pronoun ihr. So this is what the relative pronoun is going to have to replace. Gut. Now, what is the grammatical role of ihr? Sehr gut. It's the indirect object. The subject is the pronoun ich, who is supposed to entrust the accusative direct object den Auftrag with the dative indirect object ihr. You get it? What this means is this. The relative pronoun that's going to replace ihr must also be feminine, singular, and dative. And according to our handy table of relative pronouns, this relative pronoun is, we have a winner, der. Schön. And now finally, we can proceed with the construction of our beautiful sentence. Wie heißt die Kollegen, der ich den Auftrag anvertrauen soll? Alles klar? Now, I do realize that relative pronouns can be tricky, so please go easy on yourself. I can tell you from my own experiences that it takes quite a bit of time, effort, and practice until you can fluidly piece together sentences with the relative clause, especially in speaking. The first step is to do what we've done here. Write out various sentences. Decide what you want your antecedent to be. Determine what your antecedent's gender or number is. Determine the grammatical roles in the relative clause. Select the correct relative pronoun, and then construct your sentence. It takes practice and not a small amount of grit, but eventually you'll get it. Also dann, meine Damen und Herren, unsere Zeit ist leider But as always, you'll want to tune in to our next lesson, which, believe it or not, will be die 24. Lektion. And once again, I have something fantastic in store for you, namely another exciting Uber lesson, which will take us to 2 more locations in the German-speaking world. First, to the bustling North German port of Hamburg, and then to the quaint seaside town of Cuxhaven. Sehr schön. You won't want to miss it. Auf Wiedersehen und bis gleich.